The neon lights flickered in the dimly lit hall, casting a kaleidoscope of colors across the dance floor. The DJ booth was the epicenter of the evening's energy, where Mike Dog, a local legend in Eagle Rock, California, was spinning tracks with his usual flair. It was a night like any other, with the crowd buzzing and the bass thumping, but tonight was different. It had the kind of undercurrent that made you feel uneasy, even if you couldn't quite put your finger on it. I was there with Mike Dog, as I often was, with my son in my thoughts and the pressure of providing for him ever present. I juggled a life between honest jobs and the streets. That night, though, my sole focus was on Mike Dog and the party. The hall was packed, the atmosphere electric, and for once I let myself unwind, losing myself in the rhythm as I danced with a captivating Chicana mamacita. The heat of the moment was enough to push aside the nagging sense that something was about to go wrong. My attention was drawn away from the dance floor when I saw a commotion at the DJ booth. Mike Dog's face was flushed with anger, his voice cutting through the music as he yelled at a group of guys who had encroached on his territory. It was clear they weren't supposed to be there, and their presence was a spark ready to ignite. I made my way through the crowd, pushing past bodies swaying to the music. As I got closer, the group of intruders formed a barrier between me and Mike Dog. I tried to shout over the din of the party, "Yo, Mike Dog, which one?" He pointed through the throng, directing me to a big guy who was clearly looking for trouble. The big guy, towering and muscular, wasn't here to party. He jumped off the stage, his demeanor aggressive and challenging. The crowd seemed to part, sensing the shift in energy. Mike Dog responded by jumping down to meet him, but before his feet even hit the ground, the big guy threw a punch, landing it squarely on Mike Dog's head. I couldn't stand by and watch. I leapt off the stage, pushing through the group that had formed around Mike Dog and the big guy. The scene was chaotic, the music and crowd noise amplifying the tension. The big guy turned his anger toward me, his chest puffed out in a display of bravado. Without hesitation, I pulled out my .22 caliber handgun from beneath my shirt, pointing it directly at him. The weight of the gun was familiar, a cold reassurance in a high-stakes moment. The big guy's bravado faltered as he took a step toward me. "Back off!" I warned, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. When he didn't stop, I fired a single shot, the small caliber bullet striking him in the stomach. The hall erupted into chaos. People fled in every direction, scrambling to escape the unfolding violence. I kept my gun trained on the big guy, who was now retreating, his bravado replaced with a mix of pain and fear. He apologized profusely, pleading for me to let him go. "Get back!" I shouted, my finger hovering over the trigger, my heart pounding in my chest. The big guy stumbled away, and I turned my attention back to Mike Dog, who was slowly regaining consciousness. "We need to get out of here," I said urgently. I just blasted that guy. Mike Dog, still dazed but resolute, nodded and began to help me load up the DJ equipment. We worked quickly, our movements frantic but coordinated, driven by the need to escape before things got worse. Outside, the parking lot was a mix of confusion and panic. I was putting the last piece of equipment into the car when I overheard a man with a woman, his voice choked with anger and tears, promising revenge for his injured friend. My blood ran cold. The guy was only a few feet away, and his threat felt personal. I instinctively reached for my gun, pulling it out with the intention of silencing the threat before it could escalate. But as I raised the gun to the side of the man's head, an armed security guard intervened. "No, Guero," he said, his voice firm and authoritative. "No mas." The words cut through the fog of my anger and fear. In that brief, pivotal moment, I realized the gravity of the situation. If I pulled that trigger, it wouldn't just be a matter of defending myself. It would be a decision with irreversible consequences. I lowered the gun, slipping it back into its hiding place. The sound of sirens began to pierce the night, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before law enforcement arrived. Mike Dog and I finished loading up the equipment and made our way out of the hall, the urgency of the situation pressing down on us. But fate had other plans. We didn't get far before the police caught up with us. The night's chaos transitioned into the grim reality of the LAPD's downtown facility, commonly known as the Glass House. It was a stark, imposing structure where suspects awaited their fate, held in limbo until they either faced charges or were released. The sterile environment and the constant hum of fluorescent lights did nothing to alleviate the tension and fear that gripped me. The cold metal of the holding cell was a harsh contrast to the lively energy of the party just hours before. My mind raced as I sat on the bench, trying to piece together the night's events. My thoughts drifted to my son and the life I had promised to build for him. Here I was, in a cell, facing the very real possibility of losing everything I had worked so hard to protect. The hours crawled by. Every sound, every shift in the hallway outside the cell made my heart race. I knew I'd be seeing a judge soon. but the uncertainty of what lay ahead gnawed at me. Was there enough evidence to charge me? Would my actions be deemed self-defense or something far worse? Mike Dog, though shaken, had managed to avoid getting picked up by the police. He was waiting in the outer area, anxiously trying to make sense of the situation and figure out how to help me. His absence was a small comfort, knowing he wasn't also behind bars, but it did little to quell the fear I felt. Eventually, the doors to the cell block opened and I was escorted to a small room where a judge awaited. The gravity of the moment settled over me like a shroud. I had to face the consequences of my actions, the culmination of a night that had spiraled out of control. As I walked into the courtroom, I knew that whatever came next would shape the course of my life in ways I could scarcely imagine. To be continued.